Yeah, right. Okay, so I think we will start. Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this particular session titled Strengthening Agri-Food Systems Opportunities to Fast Track NDC Implementation Goals. So, for this particular one, what we're going to look at is basically the opportunities, and I'll take you through some of the structure in terms of what we'll be covering in this particular session. But we're looking at the opportunities, some of the successes, some of the challenges in terms of how the agriculture sector has contributed to the goals within the different NDCs of the different countries, mainly looking at it from an African perspective. I think if we start with a bit of background, essentially you will be aware that a lot of the food that's produced within the African continent is produced by smallholder farmers. And within those smallholder farmers, there's the marginalized smallholder farmers, which are your women, your youth, those particular individuals or groups of individuals that are disproportionately affected by some of the challenges that we'll discuss within the agriculture space. Despite these particular smallholder farmers, sort of taking up a lot of the responsibility in terms of the food that we produce, they still face or they still have challenges when it comes to access to resources, and I think finance being one of them. I think there was recently a study that was launched from the Global Alliance Food, where they've essentially indicated that although climate finance has increased over the last few years, there has been a reduction in the amount that then has been going to the food system. And I think for us that are working with smallholder farmers or closely with smallholder farmers, already we know that this particular amount is very minimal in terms of the percentage. So less than 1% actually then goes directly to the smallholder farmers. So this then sort of raises the question to say, or the action point to say that there's urgent action that there needs to be taken in terms of the funding gap to close that particular gap. But we do then acknowledge that there are some initiatives that are taking place with the limited finance that would like to then discuss during this particular session. So I think this then brings us to the point where we will then indicate a lot of examples around locally led adaptation. So looking at how the community really comes in terms of the agriculture space and the role that they play in implementing some resilient initiatives. We'll look at the different options for climate finance. I think I've spoken about the need for the urgency for climate finance to reach smallholder farmers directly. And we'll also then talk a little bit about what needs to then be done as well in this particular space. So for us to be able to do that, we've then assembled a group of speakers that are really going to speak to the different aspects, and we're just going to sort of have a discussion around some of these particular areas. I think the first speaker, if I can ask him to come up, is Mr. Dennis Sonwa. And Mr. Dennis Sonwa is from WRI, so the World Resource Institute. And he's essentially focusing on research. So he is the Research Data and Impact Director at the World Resource Institute Africa, where he's basically responsible for the research integrity across the continent, so the African continent in this particular regard. He's based in Cameroon, and he has had previous experience around forest research, around the different elements around environmental related issues within the West Africa as well as the Central African space. So welcome, Dennis. It's good to have you on the panel. Thank you. I think our next speaker is Ms. Beatrice Makwenda. If I can ask her to also please come up. And she is the program lead for an organization called Trust Africa, and basically focusing on the Southern African region. She has a lot of experience in terms of agricultural development, and she's basically worked with farmer organizations. She's worked across agribusiness development. She's supported with mobilization of farmers. Her programs really span from implementation of good practices, supporting multi-stakeholder platforms, but also looking at the advocacy side of things. She sits on a number of boards, and this is sort of this perspective that she's going to bring with us today, and she's part of a lot of communities as well. And so a lot of the comments or a lot of the discussion will be around some of those perspectives. So welcome, Beatrice. It's good to have you on the panel. I think the last speaker is Sweeney Bansari, Ms. Sweeney Bansari. If I can ask you to also please come up. And Sweeney is the Regional Climate Change Lead for an organization called Solidaridad East Africa. So Sweeney also has quite a lot of experience, over a decade, basically focusing on environmental studies. She's done a lot of community development, so working very closely within smallholder farmer communities. She's also then experienced in project management. She's done a lot of business development in terms of mobilizing funds for the implementation of some of the projects that she'll speak to, but also some of the projects in the past that she's worked on. I think her area of focus lies within climate change, food security, water, natural resource management, as well as rural financing for the communities that she's been working in. So I think with that being said, and it's good to have you as well, Sweeney, on the panel, I think we can move right into our next, or first question, rather, for the panelists that are joining us here today, as we then unpack some of the items that I had mentioned earlier before. So I think in terms of the NDCs, maybe Sweeney, if I can maybe ask you, given your role with community development, specifically working with smallholder farmers, we know that they're critical in terms of achieving the NDC targets. Can you maybe elaborate for us in terms of what are some of the challenges that they face, but also what are some of the, what's the role of partnerships? What can it play in terms of climate resilience in this particular space?
Thank you so much, Nancy, and it's good to be here and to this is an interesting discussion. And as you've rightfully put it, the agri-food systems are very critical in the NDC implementation. There's just a report that has come out very recently by FAO that says almost all countries that are subscribing to the NDC have prioritized agri-food systems, whether it's adaptation or mitigation. The statistics are very high. So the question is not really whether NDCs are recognizing the role of agri-food systems, right? It is already, it comes out very, very clearly in almost all the country NDCs. I think the question for me will be, in those NDCs, there are actions that are supposed to be implemented for us to realize the goals. So what needs to go into that to enable the farmers to actually implement? And I think that's what you're trying to ask. What are the challenges? What is basically hampering farmers from actually supporting countries to realize their NDC goals? At Solidaridad, we approach this in different ways. One of the ways in which we try and identify these challenges, particularly in the adaptation side, is through climate vulnerability assessment. And the idea is to just carry out this assessment, let them tell us what is the farmer saying about adaptation, what are the adaptation needs, and what challenges is the farmer incurring for them to be able to participate and adapt some of the actions that we are proposing. And we are seeing a variety of interesting challenges coming out of this, and one primarily is the inequalities in the agri-food systems. Inequalities in different areas. The social economic gaps, for example, for farmers are totally different. Yes, you're talking about a small-scale holder farmer, but a small-scale holder farmer in West Africa and in Asia are completely different in terms of social economic gaps. Yeah, we are talking about the level of investment that this particular farmer needs to be able to adopt and to be able to take action on what is proposed as the best practices. Issues regarding gender, we across the board, you'll hear gender-responsive climate practices, but what does that really mean to the farmer? These are some of the challenges that we are consistently coming across. The level of capital cost that is needed for farmers to adapt is also quite high. So the farmer is experiencing multiple challenges from different fronts, and we can clearly see the different inequalities in the agri-food systems that are causing this. But one key thing keeps coming up. There needs to be a higher level of investment for the farmers to adopt and take up these practices. And that's where it leads me to what you're asking next, partnerships. Where do partnerships come in? Because this is not... the farmer is not producing in isolation. He's surrounded by different actors who need to support them. So partnerships comes in very strongly. I'll probably mention what then are we doing as Solidaridad to enable these farmers to just overcome some of these barriers and so enable them to participate more, and by participating more then contribute to the NDC goals of the country. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Sweeney. And I think you've given an example in terms of how we can use some of the tools and technologies in terms of identifying some of the challenges that smallholder farmers are making, or that they're sort of experiencing. And so maybe on that same tools, technology aspect of things, if I can maybe turn to you, Dennis, and ask, around the agri-tech side of things and the digitalization. So beyond the identification of the challenges, what role does then, what role does data, collecting data, the digital technologies, how do they help in terms of tracking the implementation of the resilience of small-scale farmers?
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's good that you settled the background by saying that, the vulnerability of climate change agriculture in Africa is really well known. And then with that, we understand that, okay, we have, I will say, 70% of the production that is coming from the smallholder. And then those smallholder, as it was said, are surrounded, I will say, by different institutions, as my previous panelists say. But what I will say is that the farm where I will say that production is coming is a specific micro ecosystem. And then when you have those micro ecosystems, you need to have a good production, you need to understand your micro ecosystem. And then to better understand your micro ecosystem, sometimes technology, generally technology is important. You need some basic technology that can really allow you to be able to understand, I will say, the soil quality, the weather. All what you can imagine when it came to ecophysiology of the plant. And then to do that, what you need, and then that is the importance of the digital tools, is the fact that they can allow you to really take those information and then really, I would say, document them and then use it either by a farmer or either by decision maker or the business people to really improve, I will say, the agricultural production. You see, so that is where I would say the data and then specifically the digital tools are important. And then when we came to the way to do it, the first thing is really to have, I will say, the tools. We need to have those tools available. And then to really be able to have those tools is not an easy task, but it's a task that can be done. So that is where WAI and then other partners on the continent are really trying to help, I would say, generating those tools. When you have tools, you need some, I would say, methodology on how to measure your micro ecosystem and so on. So that is where emphasis is also put in. Now, when you have that now, you need, I would say, to make those information available. Having some, I would say, platform where those information can be available. So that gives you an idea of the way the digital tools can be useful. Now, in the practical way, to move ahead, what we do as WAI is that, okay, we try to, as much as possible, to support, I will say, some agricultural ministry, Rwanda and the two countries that we have generally to as as case is Rwanda and Kenya, where we really try to pilot, I will say, settlement of, I will say, digital tools, remote sensing tools, I will say, sensor in the different farms, so that you can really have those micro conditions, and then you can link it now with the data that you are taking remotely. And then when you have that, it really allows you to really map, I will say, your potential area of production. You can have an idea of what can be the dynamic of the crop production, the pest diseases, all the factors that are related to the production. So those are some of the, some of the activities that at WAI, my colleagues that are working specifically on food security, are trying to push at the governmental level to really try to make a colleague understand the importance of digital tools, but also working with the private sector, really making sure that they understand that there is a market opportunity there to work on those, and then also work with the farmer at the local level. So maybe let me stop here because I can speak during all the day on that. It's so passionate that...
yeah, no problem. So thank you for the passion there. And maybe just before you put down the mic, I just want to touch on your point where you're saying that you need to have the tools, right, for this particular data collection to take place, for it to then filter into the NDCs. You need to have the tools. But we see that the farmers, whether it's soil testing, whether it's remote sensing, they actually struggle to have access to these particular technologies. So maybe if I can just ask you in terms of what are some of the challenges of adoption, in terms of why is this technology not widely disseminated if it has such a great impact or potential to impact?
Good question. When we are speaking about, I will say, transition, because the vocabulary of transition is outside there: ecological transition, resilience transition. You need also to understand the reality from the beginning, and then see where you can do your transition. When it came to the digital tools, you have some constraints because you see, those are technology that are new, and then you may have, I would say, some digital illiteracy. How can I say it? Yes, people do not necessarily master those tools, and then you need to make sure that you understand their level of mastery, and then really develop, I will say, some way to update or to upgrade, I would say, that level. Now, the other thing is really finance to do that. And then that is where, I mean, this COP is important because finance is the blood of many things. It's like the blood on your body because we need money. If you want to make transition toward a very climate-smart agriculture, it's not something that will be happening without finance. I mean, so you have some finance that you need. And then my colleague, my co-panelist was speaking about the gender situation. I think you can see that also when it came to, I will say, GIS literacy. Those are some of the issues that we need to understand, and then see how we put that in the transformation process that we are moving, specifically when we are speaking with the NDC, because I mean, we know that within the NDC, what is important is the fact that, okay, agriculture was put there in the NDC, but now to really turn what is within the NDC to the reality, those are some of the specific areas that you need to work on. And then if you take the case of, let's say, WAI, one of the areas where, in terms of the food security, we put emphasis is food loss and waste. And then we realize that a few countries, for example, put, I will say, food loss and waste in their NDC. It means that maybe whether they know and then they didn't have data, or maybe they didn't even know, you see. So I mean, I think that there is a need to work also on the mindset, how to, I would say, also bring the mindset toward those new technology. We are in the area of technology, and then we need to have that in mind. Because if you take the extensionists, for example, that are working on the agricultural sector, when they were trained in the school, I'm not sure that they were exposed. I'm not sure that they were exposed on those new apps and all what we are seeing now, because but with that now we need to make sure that I mean, we build the capacity of those so that they are really aware of the fact that they need to use it, and then they know to use it, or if they do not know to use it, at least they know where they can find the younger generation that know to use it, because sometimes those new technology I think go hand in hand with the new generation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think you've spoken about illiteracy, the need to then capacity build, but even those particular, that skills development, you also need finance to be able to support those particular items. So I think you've rightfully indicated that the root of everything starts with finance and everything trickles down. And I think then if I can also ask then Beatrice to come in on this, because I think she's been working on quite some innovative financial products or opportunities or initiatives rather that she can speak to. And maybe as she's speaking us through these particular initiatives, she can also highlight some of the challenges that are faced by, women in particular. You can also then highlight maybe youth. I think he mentioned, youth can also then take on the technologies, but without the finance, that's then a challenge. What are some of the barriers rather in accessing this finance, but also maybe elaborating on what these initiatives are and how we can then participate as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you, my fellow panelists, for the insights so far. I think there is an agreement that we must match our intent with investment priorities. So I think the agri-food systems is well reflected in the national determined contributions, but also within Africa, we have the Comprehensive African Development Agriculture Program, CARDIP, that really also outlines and specifies the priorities in as far as agriculture transformation is concerned. And this is really just about time that as a continent, we've just towards the tail end of developing the next compact of the agriculture development program, which really highlights the nexus between agriculture as well as climate change, bringing in the key strategies as well as priority areas that are going to transform the agriculture sector into a resilient and a sustainable sector, as it were. So for that, it needs to be matched with financing priorities, because it is no good, we all know, to plan without necessarily demonstrating that you're putting where your heart is. That's also where you're putting your person. So you bet within the priorities that are reflected in the NDCs, but also the priorities that are being reflected in the different country agri-food system plans. So financing options, I think for first of all, we look to public investments towards the agriculture sector, or how public investments are generally allocating financing towards agri-food system transformation. And these priorities relate to land restoration, relate to seed system development, they relate to research and development, but more importantly, it is exactly where the financing should be placed to not necessarily an industrial-based agriculture system, but agroecological systems that will really deliver the resilience as well as the sustainability that it intends. So within that, we see that there are opportunities in the NDCs currently to really make agri-food systems transformation in a way where the priority public investments are going towards really supporting agroecologically sound technologies, agroecologically sound interventions that are there. So that's where we also begin to say how our public investments are allocating. And at the moment, we've been talking about the 10% allocation to agriculture. In some countries, they meet it. In other countries, they even go over to 20% if we take the countries like Malawi, and others really just barely meeting the target. But we go beyond the quantum, as this is now the current discussion at the current COP, to look at the quality of that public finance to ensure that it is supporting technology, but also it is supporting it is supporting agroecologically led intervention. And within that, it's the issue of targeting. How is public finance also targeting women? And whether the different allocations are also targeting, championing the interventions that are being laid by women farmers as well as the youth. And beyond public investment, we also that now we're looking at diversifying the financing options towards agri-food system transformation, to also look at how private sector is investing. And I think as we look into public sector investment, we are now looking at sustainable finance. How a private sector investing in really promoting inclusive agribusiness models that will also support building resilient and support some of the climate actions that are reflected in the NDCs, and being championed by women and youth. And this is where sometimes the challenges are really in terms of the barriers to accessing such kind of finance. They demand collateral, they demand maybe even engaging individually farmers as individuals, not youth as a collateral. There are also some of the requirements in terms of maybe documentation that needs to be filled for them to access some of the financing options that will transform the agriculture sector. So for all these barriers, we now need to really reflect and reform and make it easier for farmers as well as for women to access the financing options. But also it's a partnership at that level that you are really building productive alliances between rural women, between women farmers, between the youth agripreneurs that are transforming the system. So if we can reform that the requirements that they can even for private sector requirements that allow farmers to access this kind of finance. So from the other one is also, of course, we're looking at the opportunities around grants and maybe how funding towards agri-food system transformation is allocated. And this is what I think from Trust Africa point of view, the work that we are doing, both as mobilizing African philanthropists as well as philanthropy funding towards transforming or delivering on climate action within the agri-food systems transformation, to really look at meeting the local-led solutions at that level and targeting finance to where it really matters. So for Trust Africa is really catalyzing that space to target rural women, to target smallholder farmer organizations at that level that are leading and driving change with agroecologically sound interventions, but also really defining what systems should look like, as well as the agri-food transformation should look like at that level. So bringing in those multiple solutions towards financing is going to get us a long way. And we have examples that sometimes we can allow financing maybe to not necessarily to be at a scale. It is disjointed, it is scattered. But when we can really take maybe some of the initiatives that Trust Africa is also partnering with, say, the agroecology fund, pooling funding together, that can reach scale. Because it is of no use to do things at a minor scale, but we need to reach scale and impact, and that will really create the solutions that it is. So for example, the initiatives like the agroecology fund is really looking at locally led solutions and driving, defining, co-designing how funding should be done, and demystifying the requirements to access financing, and really catalyzing that change that will really transform agroecology systems, and looking at the entire value chain, not just at production level, but also seeing how we can then develop territorial markets that then will allow to do reinvestment. And because farmers are in this, it's a business. So this agro-food system transformation is a business for farmers. It's a livelihood. It must deliver food security. It must also deliver nutrition outcomes for the different families. And for that to happen, when they come to the market, it must be the true cost that will really be factored in terms of the pricing modalities and pricing mechanisms that the farmers would get, because the farmer should be allowed to get the better price that recognize the true cost of accounting of what has really gone into producing the different food, so that they are able to reinvest. So financing agri-food system, we must look at from them that multiplicity of options that will reach the scaling both out but also deep to deal with what is culturally appropriate, and advancing food and seed sovereignty in the process of transforming the agri-food system sectors. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Beatrice. I think you touched on the importance of the different sectors, but I want to just highlight the importance of the private sector, because I know one of the initiatives that the private sector are sort of also investing in is the carbon credit market, and I know this has been a topical issue within this particular COP. And I think if I can maybe ask Sweeney to come in on this one and to maybe just give us a rundown of what the role, or what you believe as Solidaridad is the role of carbon credits, and maybe just give us in terms of financing smallholder farmers or providing that additional funding for implementation, but also looking at, are there any examples of what's worked, what's not worked within this particular space?
Thank you so much, Nancy, once more. And I think just to piggyback on what Dennis and Beatrice have already said, I think what's coming out clearly is finance is an enabler, is a great enabler, whichever way you look at it. So the question then is, how do you unlock multiple streams for this farming, for the farmers generally? And those can be done in multiple ways, and some Beatrice has touched on very, very clearly. But I think what I would like to emphasize first is, before we even talk about carbon credits, adaptation needs to be the priority for Africa. It's first, how do we bounce back from the climate impacts that are coming? That is a priority for Africa. So whatever it is that we are looking at generally, particularly when it comes to the nationally determined contributions for specific countries in Africa, adaptation is key. So then now we came back and start asking ourselves, so from adaptation, if you're not able to generate the amount of finance needed, can we then leverage on the core benefits that mitigation has? Can we leverage on what else mitigation can bring to the table to realize the same goals? And I think this is where carbon credits are coming in and are strongly being pushed as one avenue in which we can incentivize farmers to begin to pick up the adaptation practices, but as well as generate an income stream to help them go on. So Solidaridad, I think you began by saying, our mission is to make sustainable value chains, as in to promote sustainable value chains for smallholder farmers. And we do this in multiple fronts, and unlocking climate finance is one of those key things. Recently, probably not recently, a few years ago, we started exploring how can farmers participate in the international carbon market space, and smallholder farmers. It didn't make business sense a few years ago, because it was too expensive. When you think about certification, you think about validation, verification. For a smallholder farmer, this was just not feasible. The business case didn't make sense. So we started asking ourselves, how else can this small-scale farmer also benefit from the carbon market space? And we began working with a partner called Rabobank. Rabobank has a carbon market platform called Econ that generally supports smallholder farmers access the international market space, but through agroforestry initiatives. So what the farmer just needs to do is plant trees, which the farmer is already, so the typical farmer in Africa is already planting trees one way or another. But how do they benefit from it? So these trees are able to generate carbon removal units from biomass that comes from the trees. And then the farmer is able to earn carbon revenue units. So we did our pilot some time back in 2021, and there was a business case for it. So in East Africa, it worked quite well. And now we started with a pilot of 1,000 farmers, and now that has grown to bigger proportions. And now we have a bigger project that's looking at 100,000 farmers spread across Latin America and then the East African region, specifically Kenya, Uganda, Nicaragua, Colombia. And the idea is we now know that farmers can actually generate carbon revenue from agroforestry. So this is already one way in which farmers can benefit from it. But now we are also seeing initiatives, we are also piloting initiatives in the biochar space in Southern Africa and in Eastern Africa. And the idea is again to try and generate and generate carbon revenue from biochar practices. Already there are very promising results in Zambia, and we are hoping to scale this up and see how else can farmers also benefit. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. It just depends on how you look at it. But I think that the message from me and what I like to emphasize is the carbon revenue is not much to actually support the adoption of these practices. But what we are saying, if the farmer can generate some sort of revenue from this, can the farmer plow back this money to help them adapt better practices that are more long-term in nature, improve the soil health, the crop productivity, and generally just acquire income. So that's what Solidaridad is doing, is trying to just bridge this gap on climate finance so that you're not consistently just saying there is no money, but what are we doing on the side, even if it's in a small way, to help bridge this gap. So a lot is going on and a lot is working, and we look forward to the prospects ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sweeney. And I think what I like about that, it is really speaks to identifying opportunities that are sort of existing, right? So if the farmers are doing it anyway, how can we then get them to be compensated, and how does that then contribute to further adaptation implementation projects? So that's quite interesting. Thank you for that particular one. I think maybe also just to sort of go back to the research angle and to leverage off of that to say, you know, if research organizations like WRI are already collecting the information around what's being done, around the implementation of some of these projects in terms of the targets that they're meeting and so on, then my question would be, on this particular topic of unlocking finance, have you seen any specific, maybe you can give examples of where research has then been used, or how can research be then used to unlock additional funding to then implement some of these particular projects that we've been speaking about?
Yes, no, I think this is a good question. When you speak when you speak on the, I would say, climate finance, and then I really like the previous development by saying that, okay, the African priority is adaptation. It's true that we need to see mitigation as an opportunity, really to leverage what is coming from mitigation, but really strengthen, I will say, adaptation. But having said this, I say that, okay, if you want to go, for example, on the climate finance business, one of the things that you need to have in mind is the fact that you can't sell carbon credit without knowing it. And then to be able to quantify those carbon credits, you really need some technology. And also that is where technology is important. We need to be able to really quantify using, I will say, the emission factor of different related to different activity, but using, I will say, activity data related to specific sector to really be able, I will say, to quantify the emission that you are either reduce or completely avoid, you see. And then that is where technology is important, and that is where research is important. Because to really be able to do that, to have emission factor, you need, I will say, those technology, and then you need research activity. So that is one point. Having said that, if I take the case of what we are doing at WAI, by providing, I would say, those tools to the farmer, and then having that appearing outside the national level, that increase, I would say, the transparency. And then within the carbon market, transparency is something that is important. Because many people with a tool that is, very well known and so on, they can improve what they have. And then beyond, I would say, beyond those tools and beyond those protocol and method, you have the research behind. So we need to really, as we are moving ahead with the implementation of the NDC, or by having the next generation of NDC, really see agriculture as, I will say, as an ecosystem around which you have, I will say, different discipline, different institutions, but also, I will say, different reality that need to be captured. And then in those reality, research need to be really recognized as important. So meaning that we need to make sure that the climate finance that is coming within the country, in terms of the benefit sharing mechanism, we may probably have certain portion that go to research, but we may need to have also certain portion that go to the, I would say, digital transformation of the country, knowing that the way we are doing agriculture, I would say, 50 years back is not the way we are doing it now. And then we really need to change the way we support, I would say, transformation of agriculture. I mean, we won't do agriculture as our grandparents were doing. We need to do it differently. And then if we need to do it differently, it means that our financial framework needs to be different from what our grandparents were doing. And then even the type of the research that we do not need to be also different, you see. So if in the past, emphasis was put in, I would say, on breeding, on soil, and so on, now we need to put also emphasis, I would say, on understand, I would say, the policy related to agriculture. We need to understand the interface between agriculture and, I would say, IT technology within the country, you see. And then that need to appear within the NDC of the country, you see. So, this is just to say that, okay, really research and then technology are there to build, I would say, an enable environment, as she was saying, but we really need to support, I would say, national research institutions so that they are really able to, to really strengthen, I would say, the resilient transformation that we are expecting to see in the continent.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think when you speak about the evidence collection, right, the importance of evidence collecting and how that then filters into some of the policy documents, I think you've mentioned around some of the national organizations that have the opportunity to actually contribute to these policies. But we then have, on the other hand, smallholder farmers who might not be or might not have that particular space to be able to influence policy in the way that the larger organizations or the larger institutions have this. But it's definitely critical that they're also, their input is included in these particular discussions. So I think if I can maybe turn to Beatrice and ask around, the work that Trust Africa is doing around advocacy. So first of all, what is the importance of making sure that the smallholder voices are heard in these particular discussions and the policy discussions that Dennis was speaking about, and maybe some of the work that Trust Africa is doing around this?
I think generally the policy making is made to serve. So by involving smallholder farmers in the policy making, then you make sure that at policy implementation, it is very responsive to the needs, and then it is really addressing the challenges that are well understood, and then more importantly, that at that policy making level, you've co-designed the kind of policy responses that need to respond to such needs. So for us as Trust Africa, we actually recognize the important role on voice and participation in different policy-making processes. And yes, while maybe we may say that they currently don't have platforms of engagement, but certainly they still have the voice, and that voice just needs to be amplified. So what we do, we have a robust methodology in terms of strengthening capacities, in terms of policy advocacy capacity strengthening. This basically is really for them to already, the voice that they already have is to amplify it and package it in a way that policymakers would understand, the language that policymakers would understand. And many times, I think sitting next to the researcher here, sometimes policymakers understand the language of scientists. So how then do we harness the indigenous knowledge of smallholder farmers, package it in a way that makes sense to a policymaker on the other side? But also we are trying to decolonize the way policy is made. That sometimes you must listen to the stories of smallholder farmers. We must listen then in the theater. We must harness even the indigenous ways into which traditional leadership even listens and responds to community issues and bring them onto the policy spaces. So that bridging of the voice and participation, but also harnessing the knowledge that is being generated is very important. And also we recognize that because there are many voices that lands on the desk of policymakers. So we also make sure that there is honest and transparent and trust at dialogue level, where smallholder farmers participate and are included in the policy discussions, whether with the researchers, with private sector actors, with others, so that you make sure where you're doing either policy consultations, where government is launching policy consultations, or in the process that we are doing now with the NDC 3.0, how are farmers contributing to the articulation of these particular plans. So at that level, we make sure that these processes are inclusive of smallholder farmers, are inclusive of women voices, are also inclusive of young people, so that then they can influence, and then also look at how they can contribute. Because at the end of the day, the policy is supposed to be implemented, and it must be implemented in these communities where these people are. Therefore, their voices do matter. So for Trust Africa, we also catalyze spaces of engagement. If the spaces are not there, we say, let us co-create the spaces of engagement to discuss around policy. If they are already existing, then we make sure how our smallholder farmers not inclusive. And we've got a lot of successes where we have really contributed to agriculture policy development, and also together under the Reclaim Sustainability, together with Solidaridad, influence the creation of multi-stakeholder platforms that are really challenging policy, but also are contributing to policy formulation, so that you make sure that these policy and regulatory mechanisms are responsive to the needs of farmers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Beatrice. And I think on that note of around sort of amplifying voices, I want, we're all sitting here from different organizations representing smallholder farmers, representing the research community. And as we maybe wrap up the session, just to ask in terms of your call to action, because it's important, again, that your voice is heard on behalf of the individuals that you're representing here today. And so as we close, I'll just ask if all of you can just speak through what is your call to action today within this particular space. What do you want people to know in relation to the NDCs, in relation to agriculture? What would be your take? Yeah.
I think Dennis is signaling that I start as he gathers his thoughts. I think what we were trying to say in this session, and I think just hearing everything that has been going on in the COP for the last 2 weeks, particularly in the agri-food systems. What I would like us to remember is farmers are not just asking and asking and asking. There was an IIED report for, I think, 2022-2023 that actually mapped that about, I think it's 498 million smallholder farmers are actually investing 368 billion to adapt. Every year, annually, this is how much that goes into farmers. So farmers are not just asking and asking, they're also investing. I think what we are trying to say is that this money is not nearly enough. If you look at the fast-moving climate crisis that is going on, it's not nearly enough to cover and bridge the gap. And hence our push for, can we get more to do more and to adapt, for the farmers to adapt better, and for farmers to unlock many other opportunities with respect to climate finance streams. Thank you, Nancy.
Perfect. Thank you, Sweeney. And I think on this particular note, it's essentially saying that the farmers are partners, right? So they're also bringing skin to the game. Now it's time for the other partners to also then bring their contribution for us to reach that resilience. So thank you so much for that, Sweeney. Maybe we can now hear from, I see Dennis has already got the mic, so please go for it.
Yes, okay. No, before I say the word of the end, I was just in a side event before where we were speaking about the importance of geospatial tools to smallholder farmers in the Congo Basin. And then it was really interesting to see how one of the civil society groups with whom we are working was explaining how, I would say, smallholder community were able to use, I would say, the geospatial information tools that they have to really go against, I would say, some of the, I would say, big agro-industry settlements that were, I would say, impacting the forest. You see, so you see that the farmers are using, I would say, geospatial tools not only for adaptation, but they can use it also for the safeguard that is related, I would say, even on mitigation process, because that was a situation where the country wanted, for example, to improve its productivity, but giving that possibility to a big agri-farm, and then the big agri-farm were impacting negatively the carbon stock of the forest, you see. And then the farmer were the one who used those technology to really map and then go and stand and say, okay, this is the border of our village. We do not need to do this. And with that, it shows the importance of, I will say, information. From what we are here, information is a power. And then we need to give more power to community. When you see the different asymmetry of situation that it was described here, asymmetry of, I will say, power, asymmetry of knowledge, asymmetry of, because she was saying that maybe, I will say, indigenous knowledge, for example, may not be considered at the same level as the research that is coming. So we have many asymmetry of situations that are happening, I would say, in the micro ecosystem of the farming system. And then with the digital tools, you have the information, and then information is power. So let us make in such a way that we put power on the hand of the farmer through some of the research data that are generating, through some of the digital information that the new technology, specifically artificial intelligence, is really allowing us to have. Having that in the hand of the power and in the hand of the farmer will really give them more power, and then make in such a way that within the community of the different stakeholders that you have around the farming system, the farming value chain, they cannot speak, I would say, with a strong evidence of what is their vulnerability or what they want to do. So put, I will say, power on the hand of farmer through data that are coming from the research, through data that are coming from the geospatial or the new technology, including artificial intelligence.
Perfect. So essentially give ammunition to the farmer, right? So to be able to then tackle some of the challenges that they're facing from climate change. And I think the example you've given, it proves that it is possible, right? Once they've got these particular tools, then they're able to fight this particular challenge. So thank you so much for that. If I can maybe ask Beatrice to also share her last thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. I think in final conclusion of this matter is to also understand that we are dealing with an ecosystem, especially when you look at food systems transformation. So we must look at, especially from the barriers point of view that farmers are facing, or women as well as young people, land becomes one of the critical aspects that also can unlock financing towards transformation. So paying attention to tenure, security, as well as access and control. Trust Africa has a land governance tool that also supports ownership of land as a critical parameter to access some of the financing that is available. But also to realize that there's opportunities that farmers, women, as well as youth are already mobilizing and organizing themselves for collective action. And that collective action is also an opportunity for agri-food system transformation that, even as we talk about NDCs, is something that we can look at. And finally, when you look at financing, we are looking at financing that is both multidimensional, multi-sectoral, approach in terms of it. So it's both public financing, private financing, but also looking at how can we connect and collaborate from the financing angle with pooled funding mechanisms that really are directed towards locally led adaptation, but also locally led and driven NDCs that are speaking with the farmers. So we look at both the quantity of financing that's coming from public, from private, but also the quality of financing that is really directed towards women, directed towards youth, as well as smallholder farmers, so that we can really achieve this. So in all fairness, we are looking at really addressing agri-food system transformation with responsive climate financing.
Perfect. So what I'm picking from this is we're all part of a puzzle, right? And women are part of it, young people are part of it, and essentially what we're looking for is the resources, whether it's access to land, access to finance. This is essentially the solution that we are trying to sort of crack. So thank you so much for that, Beatrice. I will now turn to the audience. I don't know if there's any questions from your side. Is there anything that you'd like to ask for clarity from the speakers? If there's anyone who would like to ask any questions, please go for it.
Sorry, I arrived late, so probably you already mentioned this, but how open are the smallholder farmers about adopting these regenerative agriculture practices, for example, to combat climate change? Because in my experience, and I work in Mexico with smallholder farmers, they sometimes look at these practices as a waste of the time, right? Because they don't see monetary return immediately, because some of these practices have a long-term return, right? Like land. If it is degraded, tomorrow they won't have the land. But sometimes they cannot understand this. In your experience, because it's a different region, how they take this?
Perfect. Thank you so much for the question. I see Beatrice is jumping in.
Yes, I think to start with, to also say that, we did talk about earlier, to say that they are also business-oriented people, women and young people. So as they engage in the agri-food systems or in the agriculture sector, they are looking at what is it that I'm going to get as a return of my investment. So as we promote, especially regenerative agriculture, we must look at address all the value chain barriers. And the bigger issue is around market development. How can we strengthen territorial markets, for example, so that they begin to absorb this and change and shape marketing and trade policies that will also then put priority around some of the produce that is being produced. And for many other cases is really to say that how do we really pricing the commodities right? With the participation of the smallholder farmers. So we see that I think for the Rural Women's Assembly in Malawi, now beginning to even commercialize their local indigenous seeds and participate in the seed market at that level. But also then the products that are selling to really change and shape that the territorial markets that are within there are really attractive. And it will take a lot of effort and collective action even to just raise consumer awareness on the importance of these organically or regenerative agriculture produced foods that are available. But maybe my colleagues can add.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Beatrice.
Yeah, just to top it up, so we are experiencing the same challenges in the Africa side as well. And before you came in, what we were asking ourselves is how do we help farmers adopt more? And one of the things that we talked about was incentives. You can't go wrong with opening up the markets, but you can also, for short term, before we realize the kind of markets, the ideal markets you're looking at, what are these short-term incentives that can sort of keep pushing them? And that's why we were saying one of the ways we are unlocking the carbon revenue opportunities for them and telling them, look, this carbon revenue that you have gotten, is it possible for you to plow back and use it to now buy your seedlings to encourage agroforestry? Is it possible for you to plow back to help with the different aspects, maybe it's soil and water conservation? Because we felt like in even our analysis, we are finding that finance is a key demotivator. So apart from other issues that are related with just the social economic gaps, gender, and just gender responsive climate practices, we spoke about that as well. Finance is also a key enabler. So depending on how you twist it, then you turn it as an incentive and show them how they can do it. And then in the long term, we work on the bigger and the broader processes. What does the market look like? What is the demand? How do we help them navigate this? So just investing a lot in knowing the needs, exactly what is making them not adapt better, helps quite a bit.
So we've got 1 minute left, if I can ask.
Yes,
Sorry,
it will be
very
short.
quick response.
It will be short
Thank you,
because
Sini.
it's a very important question, and then
Yeah.
really good for us to really respond and then give some, I would say, some practical element. If you take the case of, for example, agroforestry system, which is quite important on the continent, and then which is a system that can be help to climate change mitigation, but also, I would say, climate change adaptation, you see that if you take the case of West and Central Africa, for example, when you want to support I would say, farmers to adopt, I would say, new agroforestry practices. From the beginning, they have some difficulty because from the beginning, they lack funding. So it means that when we are analyzing, I would say, the life cycle of the farm, we need to understand that the budget that is needed have different need depending on the stage of the farm. And then somebody need to be able to support, I would say, certain phase of the farm where the farmer really need money. It makes it such a way that the financial structure that we are putting, I would say, in around the farming system really need to be able to support that farmer to really go into that transition. And then that is where I would say the NDC are important, because within our NDC, I mean, within different NDC, you have conditional and unconditional finance. Now, the key question will be, where did we need to put, or where did country need to put, I would say, the type of finance that need to support farmer when they're in the early stage of the farming system, you see. So it means that as we are developing our NDC, we also need to have in mind some of the reality related to the transition that our farmer may face, moving, I would say, through the transition that is making such a way that we have a climate-smart farming system on the continent, and then really help those farmers to be able, I would say, to live in the better way, because we do not want agricultural activity that keep people in the poorest situation. We want to see some sort of agricultural activity that where farmer is rich, where farmer is resilient, you see. So it need really to understand the importance of finance, and then that is where it's a business. And then in business, finance is an important part of the business. People that speak business also speak about finance, about money. So we need to have that, I would say, when we are seeing, I would say, the life cycle of the farming system that is resilient.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm hoping your question has been answered. Great. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. I think we've come to the end of the session. If you've got any other questions for the panelists, please feel free to speak to them after. But I think our session has come to an end, and thank you so much for the participation. Thanks, everyone.